They say Egypt's gods never truly died. They just went underground, hidden beneath temples and tombs, beneath layers of sand and silence. And in those hidden chambers, the priests of the Nile performed rituals so dark that even the pharaohs dared not speak of them. But what were these forbidden acts? Why were they buried, erased, and cursed by time itself? Tonight, we open the tomb that Egypt never wanted us to find. It begins not with gold, but with fear. In the heart of Thebes, long before the pyramids were plundered, the priests of Ammon-Ra gathered in secret. The great sun god, the giver of life, had to be fed, but not with bread or wine, with sacrifice. The ritual was called opening the mouth of darkness. It was performed when the Nile ran low, when famine crept across the land, when even the gods seemed deaf. According to fragments of forbidden papyri, the priest would bring forth an offering, not an animal, not food, but a man. His role was simple, to become the voice of a god. And once the ritual ended, to die as one. By torchlight, they led him into an underground chamber, the chamber of breath, beneath the temple of Karnak. The walls were covered in strange hieroglyphs not found in any public text. Symbols of the Duat, the underworld. A map, perhaps, of the soul's journey, but distorted, twisted, reversed. The air smelled of copper and incense. The high priest would draw a blade of black obsidian, whispering, "May you walk between worlds." And as the blade fell, they believed the man's last breath became the bridge, connecting Egypt and the underworld, light and shadow, God and man. The priests called it renewal. The people called it madness. But here's the thing. This ritual was never supposed to exist. Nowhere in the official scrolls, nowhere in the walls of temples do we find its name. Yet fragments from the Book of Thoth, discovered in 1890 and now sealed in the Cairo Museum, describe a rite where life was traded to bind Ra's flame to the dead. Even the Greek historian Herodotus hinted at it when he wrote that Egyptians speak not of what they do in the dark of their temples. So what were these priests hiding? Some modern scholars believe the ritual was a form of necromancy, a bridge between gods and men through blood. But others argue it was symbolic, that death represented ego, fear, the mortal self. Yet the deeper we look, the more literal it becomes. Because every Egyptian temple had one thing in common. Beneath it lay a hidden crypt known only to the priests. In Abydos, beneath the temple of Osiris, explorers discovered shafts that led to sealed chambers filled with human remains, hundreds of them, untouched for millennia. They were not royal burials. They were offerings. And on one wall, carved faintly beneath layers of soot, archaeologists found an inscription. The god awoke when the flesh was silent. No scholar can agree what it means. But in the silence of those tunnels, one thing is clear. This was no myth. It was ritual. Egypt's religion was built on balance. Ma'at, the harmony between life and death. But what happens when balance turns to obsession? When the priests start believing they can force the gods to answer? That's when the darkness begins. In the New Kingdom, around 1400 BCE, records tell of High Priest Amenemhat, who claimed to have seen Ammoni's face during a secret rite. Days later, his body was found in the Nile, his eyes burned black. The official records say divine punishment, but a fragment from his tomb says something different. He looked beyond the light and saw the fire beneath. Was this metaphor? Or was he literally blinded by something no human was meant to see? Let's pause here. Egypt is remembered for its light, its golden art, its temples, its sun gods. But it also had a night's side, the rituals of Set, god of storms and chaos. Set was both destroyer and protector, the necessary opposite of order. And his followers, the cult of Sitesh, were accused of performing rituals that mocked the gods of light. They didn't worship death, they studied it. They believed that to understand eternity, one must become intimate with corruption, decay, and pain. Their most feared ceremony was called the Rite of Dissolution, an act where sacred statues of the gods were burned, their ashes mixed with blood, then buried beneath sand to rebuild the divine essence. To outsiders, this was heresy. To them, it was renewal, destruction as a form of rebirth. One papyrus, smuggled from Akhmim in the 19th century and now known as the Papyrus of the Black Flame, describes something terrifying. It speaks of priests sealing themselves alive in tombs for 40 days, chanting hymns to the underworld. When they emerged, if they did, they were said to possess the voice of the god they invoked. The ritual ended only when one of them spoke the forbidden words, Kimin Hekau, the binding of power. Scholars have debated this phrase for decades. But those who've studied the text closely say it describes the merging of human and divine essence, a possession, a man becoming the vessel of a god. So what was Egypt hiding? Why did later dynasties, especially under Akhenaten, destroy temples, burn scrolls, and erase names from stone? Because they weren't just changing gods. They were burying something far older, something even they feared. Akhenaten's revolution, the worship of Aten, the sun disk, wasn't just spiritual reform. It was an exorcism of Egypt's past. He called it purification. But to the priests, it was blasphemy. He was shutting the door to the dark, the door they had opened for centuries. And perhaps that's why his reign ended so suddenly. Because when you close a door that has been open for generations, something might be trapped behind it. Today, Egyptologists still debate whether these dark rituals ever truly existed. Some say they were symbolic, misunderstood. Others whisper that they were real, and that's why the evidence was erased. Because the line between worship and sorcery in ancient Egypt was thin and crossed more often than we think. The gods of Egypt were not just light. They were also shadow. And in those shadows, men sought to become more than men. They wanted to command death itself. But what if they succeeded? What if those forbidden rituals didn't vanish, but survived, hidden, passed down through secret brotherhoods, long after the temples fell? Because deep beneath the sands of Luxor, archaeologists in 2015 uncovered something that made even skeptics go silent: a sealed crypt lined with obsidian knives, with no signs of burial. In its center, an altar of black granite, engraved with words not in Egyptian, but something older. The translation? We kept the flame alive. Beneath the endless sun of ancient Egypt, shadows had their own kingdom. While the people prayed in the open courts of Ra, Isis, and Osiris, another faith lived below, whispered, hidden, guarded by priests who served not the light, but the balance. They called themselves the servants of the second birth. To them, death was not an ending. It was a door, and only those who dared to open it could understand the gods. The trail begins at Abydos, Egypt's sacred city of resurrection. Every pharaoh made pilgrimages there to honor Osiris, the god who had been killed and reborn. But what most people don't know is that beneath the temple of Osiris lies a labyrinth, one that even ancient maps refuse to show. The priest said it was a holy wound in the earth. In 1902, archaeologist Margaret Murray described finding strange sealed shafts below Abydos. Inside one, her team discovered black resin-coated coffins, but no bodies. Instead, they were filled with animal bones, knives, and burnt linen scrolls. The hieroglyphs carved nearby spoke of a ritual called the renewal of flesh. No translation made sense, until a damaged papyrus from the same site revealed a line that made Murray pause. The god does not come to the living. The god comes to those who have tasted his death. This wasn't worship. It was imitation, an attempt to become divine by dying and returning. The priests of the Black Flame believed that the soul could be split, part of it staying in the mortal body, part descending into the Duat, Egypt's underworld. For 40 nights, the initiate would lie in a stone coffin, fasting, inhaling sacred smoke made of lotus, resin, and crushed minerals. Their heart rate slowed, their breathing nearly stopped. The priests would chant beside them, "Walk the river of fire, see your shadow's face, return with the wisdom of the dead." When the initiate awoke, if they awoke, they were said to have two eyes, one for this world and one for the next. But many never woke again, and those who did were never the same. In Luxor, similar texts describe another ceremony, the Feast of the Veil. It was performed during eclipses when the sun and moon were locked in the same sky. Egyptians feared those nights. They said Ra's boat was swallowed by a serpent. But to the servants of a second birth, that was the moment when the world was vulnerable, when gods and men could trade places. An inscription from a hidden chamber beneath the Temple of Mut reads, "When the light is devoured, the veil is thin. Offer the breath, and the god will wear your face." What did that mean? Some believe the ritual was possession, allowing a god, or something claiming to be one, to enter the body of a priest. Others think it was psychological, a trance brought on by drugs and deprivation. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the harder it is to dismiss, because they keep finding bodies. In 2019, an excavation in Saqqara uncovered a sealed chamber beneath a priest's tomb. On the walls, symbols of Set, god of chaos. On the floor, a ring of obsidian blades, arranged like a sun. And in the center, a skeleton with its mouth open, filled with melted gold. The inscription above it said only, "He spoke the words, and the fire took him." To the priests, this was not horror. It was holiness. They believed that by offering the body to flame or sand, the soul was purified, reborn as something closer to divine. To them, pain was transformation. The cult's most feared relic was said to be the heart of Set, a black stone said to contain the voice of the underworld. It appears in scattered writings across centuries, from Ramesses III's temple to fragments of Greek papyri found in Alexandria. It was said that whoever possessed the heart could speak with the dead, but only at great cost. One story tells of High Priest Cinnamon, who used the stone to ask Osiris for eternal power. Instead, his body decayed overnight, leaving only ash and a voice still echoing in the chamber walls. The temple was sealed and cursed with these words, "He who listens to the dead shall never again hear the living." Some Egyptologists call it superstition, but the chamber was real, and the inscriptions, burned into stone, could only have been carved by fire hotter than any torch of the time. Over time, the cult's influence spread across temples. Even pharaohs began to fear their power, for the priests held the keys to immortality and secrets that kings would kill to possess. When Tutankhamun's tomb was opened in 1922, scholars were puzzled by one inscription hidden behind his burial chamber, a hieroglyphic pattern that didn't belong to any known funerary text. Later analysis revealed it matched the Book of Coming Forth by Night, a forbidden scroll used only by the Black Flame priests. It wasn't meant to guide the pharaoh's soul to paradise. It was meant to anchor it to his body. That might explain why Tutankhamun's tomb seemed rushed and why his body showed signs of unnatural preservation. It wasn't just mummification. It was containment. They weren't sending him to the afterlife. They were trying to keep something from escaping, and so the pharaohs turned on their own priests. During the reign of Horemheb, edicts were issued to burn texts of the night and execute all who performed the old rites. Temples were purified, their names erased from stone. The cult of Set went underground, literally, but they didn't vanish. Because the papyrus of the Black Flame mentions one chilling line, written centuries after Set's temples fell. "We went beneath the sand. The light forgets us, but the dark remembers." Fast forward to Alexandria, 300 years before Christ. The city is alive with Greek scholars and Egyptian mystics. Philosophers from Athens trade secrets with temple scribes. And somewhere in that melting pot of magic and reason, the teachings of the Black Flame reappear. A sect known as the Hermetic Brotherhood emerges, claiming to carry the hidden knowledge of Thoth. But fragments of their writings, preserved in the Corpus Hermeticum, speak of ascending through death and awakening the God within through suffering. Sound familiar? They never say Egypt, never say Set, but their words echo the same forbidden rituals that once bled under the temples of Thebes. So maybe the cult never died. Maybe it simply evolved. It shed its name, its hieroglyphs, its gods. But its heartbeat, that hunger for divine power through darkness, kept beating in secret orders, in hidden temples, in whispered initiations across time. And that brings us to one final mystery. In 2021, deep beneath the sands of Dakhla Oasis, archaeologists unearthed a sealed catacomb untouched for 3,000 years. Inside were murals unlike anything in known Egyptian art. Not gods of light, but figures with burning eyes, standing in circles of fire. And in the center, a single word, written in red ochre, Kemenhekau. The same words found in the papyrus of the Black Flame. The binding of power. What if these rituals never truly stopped? What if something buried beneath Egypt still remembers? The sands of Egypt have always buried more than bones. They buried truths. And as centuries turned to dust, the cult of the Black Flame, Egypt's darkest secret, didn't die. It transformed. By the time of Ptolemy I, when Greek kings ruled from Alexandria, Egypt was a cauldron of philosophies, Greek reason, Persian mysticism, and the last whispers of the old gods. The temples still stood, but their priests spoke in riddles now. The rituals, outlawed and feared, continued behind sealed doors. And somewhere in that twilight of two civilizations, the ancient Egyptian obsession with death and rebirth found new life. A few centuries later, mysterious writings began to circulate through Alexandria. They were said to come from Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, a fusion of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, god of wisdom. But when historians compared these texts to older Egyptian sources, they found something unsettling. The Hermetic corpus, long thought to be philosophical, contained passages eerily similar to the papyrus of the Black Flame. If you would see the divine, die before you die. The world is illusion. Only the fire within is true. These weren't metaphors. They were instructions, codes for transformation through controlled death. Some scholars believe the Hermetic Brotherhoods were direct descendants of the servants of the second birth. They simply translated their rituals into Greek philosophy, hiding the old Egyptian initiation rites under poetic disguise. The purpose was no longer just to survive death. It was to become like gods while still alive. When Rome conquered Egypt in 30 BCE, they took more than gold and grain. They took knowledge. Roman generals, senators, and emperors began to visit the temples of Isis and Osiris. They were not tourists, they were seekers. At the height of the empire, Isis cults appeared in Rome, Pompeii, even Gaul. But beneath the public ceremonies, darker initiations took place in candlelit basements. The Roman historian Plutarch wrote, "In the secret places, they speak of things not to be written." Those things included resurrection, rituals eerily close to the ancient renewal of flesh. Initiates were locked in tombs overnight, symbolically killed and reborn under the watch of veiled priests. Some believed they emerged with visions of the gods. Others never emerged at all. Around 40 CE, a Roman noble named Caligula became obsessed with Egyptian power. He ordered the reconstruction of the Temple of Isis in Rome and demanded initiation into her deepest mysteries. According to the chronicler Suetonius, Caligula believed that through these rites, he would live among the gods, not as a man. Days later, he began dressing in golden robes, speaking to invisible beings, and calling himself the new Ra. The Senate declared him mad, but perhaps he had merely seen what no mortal was meant to. Later emperors, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, even Septimius Severus, maintained secret Egyptian advisors. Severus himself was buried in a black sarcophagus modeled after Osiris, surrounded by carvings of serpents and flames. The black flame had found its way into the heart of Rome. Then came the new faith, Christianity. It promised eternal life, but through faith, not ritual. To the old Egyptian priests and Roman initiates, this was heresy, a cheap imitation of what they pursued for centuries. And yet, the parallels were unmistakable. Death and resurrection. Communion with the divine. Transformation of the soul. It's as if the same ancient fire had been wrapped in a different language. Even church fathers like Origen and Clement of Alexandria hinted that Christian rites, especially baptism and communion, were mysteries echoing Egyptian and Greek initiation traditions. But the church feared competition. As Christianity rose to power, it sought to erase all traces of older spiritual systems. Temples were looted, scrolls were burned, priests of Isis were executed, and yet, in the shadows of monasteries and secret libraries, certain texts were copied, not destroyed. Hidden beneath layers of theological commentary, they carried strange ideas. The light is found in the dark. The Spirit must descend to ascend. Those were not Christian words. They were Egyptian. By the 4th century CE, when Emperor Theodosius declared all pagan worship illegal, the cult of the Black Flame should have vanished forever. But something survived. In 1945, in the Egyptian desert near Nag Hammadi, a farmer unearthed a sealed clay jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices, early Christian texts that had been banned as heresy. Among them were the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Philip, and a mysterious tract called the Thunder, Perfect Mind, all written in Coptic, the last language of ancient Egypt. But one text stood apart. It spoke of a secret fire that lives in the heart of man, a flame that can consume the world and make it new. It warned, "He who kindles it without purity shall be devoured." Modern scholars call it the Book of the Hidden Flame. It was unsigned, undated, but the handwriting and the ritual descriptions matched fragments from the papyrus of the Black Flame, discovered centuries earlier. Was it coincidence? Or proof that the old religion had simply changed its name? By the Middle Ages, whispers of that same power reappeared in Europe under a new form, alchemy. To most, alchemy was about turning metal into gold. But to the initiated, it was about transforming the soul. Alchemical texts spoke of a black phase called nigredo, where the self must be dissolved in darkness before rebirth, an uncanny echo of the Egyptian second birth rites. The Hermetic maxim, as above, so below, as within, so without, came straight from Egypt. And at the heart of every alchemist's dream was a single object, the philosopher's stone, a source of divine fire capable of granting immortality. What was that if not the heart of Set, reborn under another name? In 2019, satellite imaging near Abydos revealed a buried structure, circular, unlike any known temple. When ground radar probed deeper, archaeologists found faint walls forming a seven-fold spiral. At its core, sensors detected a cavity lined with basalt, black as night. The site remains sealed under the desert, pending study. But leaked field notes suggest the chamber aligns precisely with the ancient feast of the Veil calendar. Coincidence? Or the resting place of the cult's final sanctuary? Across 5,000 years, the pattern is clear. The servants of the second birth became the Hermetic Brotherhood. The Hermetics became the alchemists, and their flame, forbidden, hidden, and eternal, burns even now in secret societies and mystery schools that trace their lineage to the dawn before the pyramids. They never called it evil. They called it truth, The truth that creation and destruction, life and death, are one motion, and that to become divine, one must embrace both. Maybe that's why the ancients feared these rituals, because the priests of the Black Flame weren't worshiping demons or gods. They were trying to become equal to them. And if their knowledge still survives in texts, in symbols, in oaths whispered behind closed doors, then perhaps Egypt's darkest secret was not about the dead at all. It was about the living who refused to die.